Welcome to CGN TV. This afternoon, we will all travel back in time and let us see how the Christian education of the youth began. It was not until the late 1950s that churches began to invest significant salary funds in staff positions related to youth ministry. Prior to that time, most, if not all, youth ministry was done by volunteer workers, most of whom were unqualified and poorly trained for such work. It is also true that most evangelical churches grudgingly instituted youth ministry as part of the total church program only because they feared that parachurch organizations such as Youth for Christ, Young Life, and Christian Endeavor would take young people out of the local church ministries if they didn't do something to counteract the appeal of parachurch groups. Youth ministry in the 1950s was often little more than an attempt to provide Christian-oriented entertainment as a means of countering the attraction and influence of secular entertainment on Christian youth. Christian films were produced in hopes that they would be seen as viable alternative to movies in secular movie theaters. High-powered recreational and social programs were developed as an alternative to school dances, which were frowned upon by the church. Large rallies featuring famous Christian entertainers were held in major cities as a means of convincing youth that one could be Christian and still be popular and well-liked. A historical perspective makes it clear that the focus of the youth ministry in the 1950s was on entertainment as a means of retaining the youth within the church. The 1960s proved to be a landmark decade. The local church's program to youth ministry was greatly affected by the sociological and cultural times. Young people across the nation began to demonstrate that they cared greatly about issues related to the world in which they lived. In fact, many rejected entertainment as an unworthy activity for church youth ministry. The turbulence of the 1960s taught youth ministry professionals that young people needed wise advisors whose lives were significant role models more than they needed entertainment. Some forward-thinking youth workers in the 1960s captured the activist vision of young people for ministry and missions work, taking groups of high school and college-age young people to various mission fields all over the world for short-term experiences and cross-cultural involvement. These activist mentality continued to dominate the youth ministry scene well into the 1970s. The decade of the 1980s was in some respects a most troublesome one for the youth ministry. No population group has been more influenced by the pleasure motive than adolescents. They have demonstrated that they are willing, and in many cases, to pay the price to get what they want out of life. Ministry to youth in the decade of the 1990s is no less challenging. The effects of decades of eroding sexual standards, growing drug dependence, and epidemic violence, which is now commonplace on the high school campuses, have each contributed toward an adolescent culture which is harder to understand and most difficult to reach. Perhaps one of the most disturbing aspects of this sociological commentary is the way in which adolescents have sought to get their needs met through sexual involvement. The results of this sexually promiscuous lifestyle are alarming. On a typical day, for example, in the United States, 7,742 teenagers become sexually active. 623 teenagers contract syphilis or gonorrhea. 2,795 teenage girls become pregnant. 372 teenage girls suffer a miscarriage. 1,106 teenage girls obtain an abortion. 1,295 teenage girls give birth to a child. 2,556 children are born out of wedlock. Further, these bent on obtaining pleasure, wealth, popularity, and fame have led many young people to a life of violence. Again, on a typical day, just like in the United States, 135,000 students bring a gun to school. 10 children are killed with guns. 211 teenagers are arrested for drug abuse. 437 children are arrested for drinking or drunk driving. Some teenagers have given up hope for any meaningful satisfaction in life. Not only are their own lives so void of meaning that they no longer can cope, but the lives of those closest to them, their parents, are also falling apart. Once more, on a typical day in the United States, 6 teenagers commit suicide. 1,512 teenagers drop out of school. 3,288 children run away from home. 2,989 children see their parents divorce. Where are we to go? What are we to do? Now is the time to act as a body of Christ and reach out to the youth of this world.